Tonight's story begins with a simple offer, sent late when the world was quiet enough to hear your own doubts. $10,000 for one night. No skills required, no questions asked. Just sit in a chair and do not open a door. They called it easy money. Of course, there's always a reason money becomes easy. I left for the house just after sunset. The road was empty, quieter than it should have been for a weekday. Streetlights blinked like tired eyes. The rain stitched a silver thread across the windscreen, gentle and persistent. The directions the man had sent were brief, just a location pin at the edge of town, where the forest begins to gather and the map turns a pale green. I remember thinking how still everything looked. No litter brushing the curb, no late dog walkers, just the soft sway of trees and the hush that comes when the world decides it doesn't want to be seen. The house appeared between the pines like a thought you almost forgot. Old, but not ruined. Cared for, but only in the way a secret is cared for. Quietly, with no announcements and a certain careful distance. I parked by the rusted gate. It groaned in a way that felt practiced, as if it had been waiting years to make that exact sound for me. The gravel under my tires shifted reluctantly, each crunch sounding far louder than it should in the still night air. The man who met me at the door looked ordinary in a way that unsettled me more than any strangeness could have. Tall, dark coat, plain face. The sort you could pass a dozen times in town and never remember. His voice, though, carried weight. Not heavy, not threatening, but patient, like someone who had spoken the same words to many others and knew exactly how they would be heard. "You will sit in the hall," he said. "There's a chair there. You will keep the lamp on low. You may read, you may rest, you may listen. You will not sleep, you will not leave. And no matter what you hear, you will not open the door at the end of the corridor." He handed me an envelope. Its paper was thick, the kind that seemed to hold more history than ink. Inside were two things: a brass key I would not need, and a list of rules written in neat, deliberate strokes. 1. Arrive by nightfall. 2. Sit in the chair. 3. Keep the lamp on low. 4. Do not speak, even if spoken to. 5. Do not open the door. The ink looked slightly smudged, as if the words themselves had been read too many times. I asked him, trying to keep my voice casual, whether anyone else would be in the house. He tilted his head, considering me for a long, quiet second. His eyes reflected the lamp above the door but gave away nothing. "No," he said finally. "Not unless you invite them." His answer lingered like the aftertaste of something bitter. The hall smelled faintly of polish and rain-soaked wood. The corridor stretched ahead, narrow but precise, the kind of passage that seemed to guide you rather than simply contain you. The walls were lined with pictures, their glass faintly fogged, frames tilted at angles that suggested they'd been watching longer than they'd been hanging. And at the end, just visible in the half-light, the black door. Its surface absorbed the glow around it, drinking it in like water on thirsty soil. A brass handle glimmered softly, too bright, too polished compared to the rest of the house. It was as if the rest of the corridor existed only to lead the eye to that one place. The man's voice broke my thoughts. "That is the door." His words left behind a chill, the kind that makes the back of your neck tighten. 6 in the morning, he said. "I will return." And then he was gone. The door closed behind him with a softness that felt deliberate. Somewhere deep in the house, a clock cleared its throat and began to mark the minutes. Each tick echoed faintly through the corridor, like a reminder that time was now a companion I could not shake. He led me through a narrow corridor, with wooden floors polished to a dust-coloured shine. Each step felt like stepping into a memory someone else had left behind. On the right, a long wall lined with framed pictures. The glass was clouded, the frames tilted slightly as though they were leaning in to listen. Most were old photographs, their tones faded to brown and grey, the kind that made you wonder if they had ever truly captured anything real at all. On the left, a row of sealed doors, painted in the same dark green, identical in shape, unremarkable in detail, until the very last one. At the end of the corridor stood a black door. The wood looked heavier, darker, as though it had been carved out of shadow itself. The brass handle gleamed faintly, almost too clean compared to the rest of the house, as though it had been touched recently, or often. The keyhole was long and thin, shaped like a droplet of rain about to fall. "That is the door," he said. His words sank into the hall like stones dropped into still water, and I felt a cold line trace itself down my spine, the kind of chill that doesn't fade quickly. He placed a hand on the backrest of the chair that waited in the centre of the corridor. It was a sturdy thing, wooden and plain, with a worn cushion that seemed to have remembered many nights before mine. "6 in the morning," he said softly. "I will return." He turned, his coat whispering against the polished floor. The sound of the front door closing followed, quiet, deliberate, final. It was not a slam, but something gentler, something that carried the weight of expectation. Somewhere in the depths of the house, a clock found its voice. The tick of the minute hand was faint but steady, a patient reminder that time was watching me. I lowered myself into the chair. It welcomed me with a firmness that was neither kind nor cruel. The lamp beside me glowed faintly, and when I turned its light down low, the corridor seemed to draw closer, leaning in just beyond the amber circle it allowed. The chair creaked beneath my weight, the sound echoing through the long passage. I placed my bag by my feet and listened. The house exhaled. It was the kind of sound only old buildings make, part settling wood, part shifting air, part memory trying to be remembered. Every crack in the walls, every bend in the floorboards spoke in its own way. The rain outside played gently against the windows. It was constant, patient, the kind of sound that folded the night into itself. It wasn't threatening, just present, like a background voice keeping you company when you don't want to be entirely alone. I looked down the corridor. The black door absorbed the lamp's faint glow. It didn't reflect. It didn't shimmer. It seemed to drink the light, pulling it inward, until the wood itself looked less like a door and more like a shadow pretending to be solid. I tried to look away, but the edges of my vision always found it again. It was the kind of presence that refused to be forgotten, no matter how hard you tried to let your eyes wander. I took the envelope from my pocket once more. The paper was already softening at the edges from my hands. I read the rules again, slowly, as if repeating them could make them stronger. Arrive by nightfall. Sit in the chair. Keep the lamp on low. Do not speak, even if spoken to. Do not open the door. The words rested heavily in the still air, and the house listened. The minutes stretched out, folding one into another. Time felt different here. It didn't rush. It didn't drag. It simply lingered, the way a shadow lingers after the sun has gone down. I listened to the house. At first, it was only the clock. Tick, tick, tick. Then, as my ears adjusted, I heard more. The faint sigh of wood bending under its own age. The whisper of air shifting through unseen cracks. A drip of water, far away, falling into a sink or a pipe that hadn't been used in years. The house wasn't empty. It was full of its own sounds, full of its own memory, and I was just another listener added to its collection. The photographs along the wall seemed to breathe with me. Faded landscapes, fields with no farmers, lakes with no boats, bridges that led to nowhere. In each picture, the sky looked swollen with the promise of rain, like it had been holding back a storm for decades. One frame tilted, ever so slightly. The glass caught the lamplight differently than it had before. It wasn't much, only the smallest angle, the kind of shift no one else would notice. But I noticed. Wood settles, I told myself. Nails give way. Frames lean with time. Simple explanations for simple things. And yet, the air felt thicker, as though the house had heard me think that, and smiled at the excuse. I drew in a slow breath. The smell of polish and damp hung faintly in the air. When I let the breath out, the building answered me with a soft creak, as though it had exhaled too. It made me smile, a nervous, reluctant smile, like I was sharing a joke with someone I didn't trust. It was close to midnight when I heard it, the first knock. It didn't come from the black door. Not yet. It wasn't the front door either. It came from somewhere in between, somewhere in the middle of the house. 3 soft taps, a pause, then 3 more, weaker, almost embarrassed. I sat still. The chair beneath me was steady, my hands fixed to the armrests. The sound echoed down the corridor like a thought that had slipped out of someone's mouth. The house fell silent with me. The rain outside softened its voice, as if waiting for me to respond. Another knock. This one was closer, still gentle, still polite, but unmistakably there, like someone trying to learn the rhythm of asking for permission. I turned my eyes down the corridor. The black door was waiting at the end, unchanged. And yet, around its edges, I saw something new. A faint line of light, as though a lantern burned on the other side, hidden until now. The glow flickered once, like a slow blink. Then it steadied. I gripped the arms of the chair tighter. The rules pressed themselves into my mind, louder than the knocks, louder than the rain. Do not open the door. The 5th rule. The only one that mattered. People often talk about hearing their name in the dark. They say it's a trick of the mind, how the brain snags on random sounds, shapes them into familiar syllables, and convinces you that someone is calling you. I told myself that. I reminded myself of it. But the truth is, when you hear it, when the air itself seems to lean forward and whisper something only you should know, it feels different. That night, I heard my name, not spoken loudly, not even clearly, but carried thinly on the corridor air, the way wind finds a crack and makes a note of it. I froze. My fingers curled against the chair's wooden arms. It wasn't a voice, not really. More like the suggestion of speech, the shape of sound that had chosen to fall into my syllables. I let it pass through me, the way a bird passes across a window, here, then gone, not answered, not refused, just a movement I didn't claim. The lamp at my side hummed softly, the sound blending with the rain. The drops struck the glass outside with more insistence now, their rhythm louder, sharper. Somewhere outside, a branch shook loose its burden, and a rush of water slid down the wall like a sigh. The clock kept its patient tick, steady, comforting, the one honest sound in the house, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. I reached for the envelope again, needing the weight of something ordinary. The paper felt thinner now, softer at the corners from my handling. When I pulled the flap open, I noticed something faint inside, not written with ink, not boldly enough to be seen at first glance, but there, scratched lightly in pencil, almost invisible. I held it close to the lamp's glow. The words appeared like dust catching light. If you hear them knock, you may answer with silence. If you hear them speak, you may answer with breath. If you hear yourself, you must not answer at all. The graphite looked like it would crumble away if I touched it too hard. The kind of writing left not for decoration, but as a warning, a quiet truth scrawled in desperation. I felt my thumb trace the edge of the paper. The rules had always been simple, but this edition made them heavier. It made the house feel heavier. Then it came again. Another knock, not from somewhere distant, not from the middle rooms. This time, it was from the black door. The sound was soft, almost apologetic, like someone tapping only to remind you they were there, not demanding, not urgent, just present, the kind of knock that already knows the answer. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. The brass handle didn't move. The line of light around the edges glowed faintly, steady, calm. I gripped the chair and fixed my gaze on the lamp. 1, 2, 3. I counted slowly, each number stretched across my breath. By the time I reached 30, the knock had stopped, so I started again. Sitting for hours does strange things to the body, and stranger things to the mind. The silence between knocks grew longer and yet heavier, as though silence itself had gained weight. I became aware of every detail of myself, the angle of my shoulders pressing against the chair, the slow tide of my breathing rolling in and out like a private sea, the weight of my hands resting in place, as if they no longer belonged to me, but to the room. The chair creaked once, a quiet, polite sound, like a throat being cleared. Not mine, not anyone's, but the chair itself. And in that moment, I understood something. This chair had held others. It had carried nights like this before. It remembered them, even if it could not speak of them. The thought unsettled me, and yet there was comfort in it too, as if I was not the first and would not be the last, as if I was merely another thread in a fabric that had been woven long ago. The lamp's circle of light felt warmer now, pressing softly against the edges of the dark. It gave the corridor a fragile kindness, as though it were trying its best with the little it had. But beyond that glow, the shadows thickened, alive with the sound of the rain. The windows rattled faintly, the gusts outside brushing the glass with invisible hands. Drops of water tapped steadily, their rhythm almost musical. The house and the storm seemed to speak to each other, leaving me to overhear a conversation I was not invited into. I closed my eyes for a moment, and I pictured the front door, the street outside, the car waiting by the gate. Simple, ordinary things, tethers to the daylight world. But when I opened my eyes, the brass handle on the black door was turned halfway down. Not fully, just enough to say, I could, if you asked me to. The line of light beneath the frame pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, slow, patient, waiting. Then came the voice, if it could be called that. It wasn't sound the way we know sound. It was more like a thought that had been given permission to leave its cage. A presence forming words from air itself. "Cold," it murmured. "Are you cold?" The sound threaded down the corridor and curled around me. Not cruel, not threatening, just curious. I did not answer. Instead, I gave only what the hidden note had told me to give. Breath, in and out. The voice was patient. It tried again. Lonely. It whispered this time, softer, almost tender. "Are you lonely?" My chest rose, my chest fell, in and out, answering only with the rhythm of living. And then, after a long pause, it found something sharper. A word it should not have known. My name. Not the name I had given the man at the door. Not the name anyone here should have known. But the small name, the private one. The nickname only family had used, spoken softly in kitchens, called across fields when I was young. Hearing it now in this place froze me to my core. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't begged. It was simply placed in the air, perfectly shaped, perfectly certain. Every muscle in my body tightened. The rules rang in my head, louder than the storm, louder than the voice. If you hear yourself, you must not answer at all. So I sat. I breathed. And the house listened. To keep from staring at the black door, I let my eyes wander back to the wall of photographs. The glass reflected the faint lamplight, dull and clouded, as though the pictures were exhaling fog. Something had changed. The photograph of the rowboat. It was no longer in the reeds where I remembered it. It had drifted just slightly toward the center of the lake. The water around it rippled faintly, though no hand had touched the frame. I blinked and leaned closer, the air in my lungs sharp and cold. Another picture. The path through the field. A shadow now stretched across the grass, though there was no tree, no cloud in the sky above it. It was a shadow without an owner. And then the bridge that had once led to nowhere. There was a figure there now, small, distant, a silhouette so faint I wondered if my eyes had invented it. It stood with its back to me, looking away, as though into the very absence beyond the picture's edge. I returned to the chair slowly. My body felt heavier, as though the air itself pressed against me. I kept my eyes away from the frames. Attention can be an invitation, and I had no invitations left to give. The chair creaked softly when I sat. The wood pressed against me, steady, grounding, and I forced my breathing to match the tick of the clock, as though rhythm alone could anchor me. There is always a long hour in nights like these, not early enough to call it dawn, not late enough to pretend it's still evening. Just that suspended time where the world holds its breath and waits. It was in that hour that the black door began to glow faintly. Not a bright light, not enough to see by, but a soft halo along its edges like moonlight trapped beneath water. It pulsed slowly, as though the door itself was drawing breath. The brass handle lifted, not fully, just enough to stir. It rose as though someone inside had wrapped invisible fingers around it, then lowered again, patient, unhurried. And then, silence. The kind of silence that feels thick, as though every surface in the corridor is leaning closer, listening. A hum rose faintly, not from the lamp, not from the rain, but from the black door itself. Low, steady, the outline of a lullaby I almost recognized. A song I had heard long ago, when sleep was easier, when nights had no weight. It came without words, only the melody, and it wrapped itself around me like the rain outside, seeping in whether I wanted it or not. The rules swam in my head again. Do not speak. Do not open the door. Answer only with breath. I clung to them like a prayer, even as the song pressed closer, pressing gently against the edges of my thoughts. At some point, the knocking changed. It was no longer at the black door, no longer distant, polite, or hesitant. This time, it came from beneath me. A soft, deliberate tapping from the underside of the chair, not loud, not hurried, but steady, like a fingertip brushing wood in thought. Tap, a pause. Tap. Another pause, almost gentle. I froze, every part of me tightening against the sound. My breath felt too heavy, too loud. I was suddenly aware of the pressure of the chair beneath me, how close I was to whatever lay on the other side of that wood. The tapping continued for a while, never rushing, never forcing. As if it only wanted to remind me that I was not alone, that the chair itself had something to say. And then, just as quietly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was deeper than before, a silence that had been listening and was now satisfied. I sat there, still as stone, my eyes fixed on the lamplight. The amber glow seemed smaller now, shrinking against the weight of the dark. The rain had softened again, its voice reduced to a fine whisper on the glass. It felt as if everything in the house had agreed to pause, waiting, watching, measuring whether I would keep the rules. Time passed strangely. The clock continued, but I no longer trusted its rhythm. It ticked faithfully, yet I could not believe that the same minutes were moving outside this corridor. Here they stretched, bent, folded back on themselves. At last, I noticed the faintest grey along the edges of the window, the barest suggestion of morning. The air had shifted too, carrying with it a cooler breath, as though the night was finally exhaling. The brass handle on the black door stirred once more. It lifted, held, and then released, settling back into place with a soft, almost courteous click. It was the kind of sound that could almost be mistaken for nothing at all. Almost. And then the humming stopped. The corridor fell silent except for the sound of the rain thinning to mist. For the first time in hours, the house seemed to loosen its grip. I closed my eyes, just for a moment, and when I opened them again, the faintest trace of pale light had begun to slip between the curtains. Morning was coming, and with it, something else. When the hour before morning came, I almost didn't notice it. It was not sudden, but gradual, like a curtain being drawn back, thread by thread. The rain softened into mist. The rhythm against the glass became delicate, almost playful. No longer a weight pressing on the night. The lamp's glow seemed wider, kinder, its edges less severe. The corridor, once so heavy with shadow, looked almost forgiving. The brass handle gave one final twitch, the faintest lift. And then, it settled. The movement ended with a small click, polite, so quiet it could have been my imagination. For a moment, the silence after felt enormous, like the house itself was finally exhaling. And then I heard them. Footsteps. They approached from the far end of the corridor, not from the black door, but from the entrance, measured, calm, steps that belonged to someone who knew the building well. The man in the dark coat appeared. His face was unchanged, patient, unreadable. He looked at me, still seated in the chair, and nodded faintly. "You did well," he said. "Did I?" My voice was rough, as though I hadn't spoken in days. "Yes," he replied. You answered only with breath. The words rang with quiet certainty, and then he turned away. I rose from the chair, my legs stiff, as though the weight of the night had settled into my bones. The house felt lighter now, emptier, as though it had released me the moment he opened the front door. Outside, the world was pale with early morning. The gate groaned again as I pushed it open, but this time the sound was uncertain, like it no longer knew what it had been waiting for. The car was cold, damp with mist, but it was mine. I drove away slowly, the house shrinking behind the trees until it was gone, just another shadow among the pines. When I finally opened the case at home, there was money inside. Stacks of notes, neatly arranged, more than enough to make me wonder if any of it had been real. But tucked beneath them was something else. A note, handwritten, faint, the pencil strokes soft, as though left in haste. It read, "Thank you for keeping the door closed. It does not matter what lies behind it. It matters only that it stays behind it. If you ever feel a knock in an empty room, answer with silence. If you ever hear your name in a place you did not offer it, answer with breath. And if you ever feel that a part of you is waiting on the other side, do not invite it in with a story." I held the note for a long time until the sun was fully risen, and even then, its weight did not leave my hands. Sometimes, when the night leans too close, I remember the corridor, the tilted photographs, the steady tick of the clock, the chair that has held too many secrets. And when I hear the faintest knock, not on a door but somewhere in the quiet walls of sleep, I do what I was taught. I count to 30, and then to 30 again, and I answer with the softest thing I have: breath.